Hi, well, greetings, and we're glad to have you for another edition of Content Evolution New World. I'm Kevin Clark, co-host is Mike McGuire. We're delighted to have Richard Boyd and Linda Bernard today as our guests talking about digital twins, all right, for soft skills and imparting the things that we all need to be able to interact with each other in effective ways. Today, Mike is going to be our host, but I just want to say that I've known Richard for over a decade, very talented person going all the way back with, he's going to share some of his background in games and simulation learning and digital twins, machine learning, and how that all brought what he's going to share with you today to a powerful current to fruition. I'll just say that I'm also on the board of the company that he's on, which is why I'm going to turn the call over to Mike. I'm recusing myself, but it's really fun working with Richard and Linda. So, Mike, anything you want to say before we get underway?
No, I'm very eager to hear more about Ultisim. Some of you know I worked at Gartner for a long time, and there were some folks working on that concept. To be honest, this one seems much more interesting and useful to me than what I was seeing before, not to denigrate my former employer and their analysts. But this seems to be one that is particularly on point for what a lot of the needs of businesses and organizations are going forward. So I'm, again, not denigrating my past employer, but this one really caught my eye. So I'm very anxious to dive into it. Linda, Richard, we'll turn it over to you. Folks, we keep the questions in the Q&A, unless something, I guess if somebody feels really strongly about something, feel free to raise your hand and I'll keep an eye out. But let's get the Q&A. We'll get the discussion going. And Richard, Linda, thank you so much for joining. And over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kevin.
I have a co-host question. I'm sorry, I should have asked this before, Richard. Kevin, even though you've recused yourself, you can handle the share screen stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There we go.
No, I'm not turning that over. I'm
Thank you
throughout. Cheers.
I'm glad that.
All right, well, again, thank you for the introduction and thank you for this. As I look through this list, I see a lot of amazing folks. Linton Wells, we just met in DC recently at an event I was speaking at, and I admire a lot of the work that you're doing. Mark Prinsky, gosh, this is great to be able to talk to you guys. And I know I've spoken to you all before, so Kevin reminded me beforehand, it's like there's no point in me sort of recreating my entire history for you guys, but I will give you, for those who may be attending one of my talks for the first time, I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version of it. But I do have with me Linda Bernard, who's our COO at Ultisim. She was sixth generation, born in Africa. She's from Malawi, Africa, a teacher, a chemical engineer, and a math teacher, and is helping guide us and keep us true to our aim in bringing these technologies to bear in education. And I found that very critical and crucial in helping us there. So what we're going to do is talk through some of the technologies we're bringing to bear on this issue of how do you teach some of the languishing, soft skills, both in schools and elsewhere, using technologies like AI, generative AI, machine learning, and of course, this game-based technology that I've been working with for 30 years. And so we'll go through some of the background of it and then give you a demonstration at the end. And it is a work in progress, so you'll see some of the elements of that stage of development that we're in. Again, for those who know me or even those who don't, the teams that I've been working with over the last 30 years, I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of the same people. I still work with David Smith today. I met him in 1990. We were at the time working on the set of the movie The Abyss with James Cameron and using 3D computer game technology to model the set and show him he didn't have to build about a third of the set, especially since he was building it in a nuclear reactor. That saved him a lot of money. We've been friends ever since, and you might see some of that stuff on the wall behind me. Worked a lot in the movie industry on the first Mission Impossible movie, Brian De Palma said our 3D software at the time was a godsend to the film industry. So we had a lot of fun in the 90s, did a lot of game companies, we're primarily known for and blamed for having created the first realistic tactical shooter game that we did with author Tom Clancy. That was a game company called Red Storm Entertainment. So again, back in the 90s, games were still shooting monsters, picking up health packs, not of any real tactical value that you know could apply to the real world. And we actually worked with the FBI hostage rescue team where, you know, with accurate ballistics, one-shot kills, all that stuff. And our first game was Rainbow Six, and that became what is today $1 billion a year game franchise. Of course, we sold it a little bit too early, and sold it to Ubisoft before it had reached that lofty level. But we did that same model with a couple of other authors. So we went and did a game company with Michael Crichton. We did one with Douglas Adams, a science fiction writer, even Ozzy Osbourne. We talked to Stephen King. We talked to Orson Scott Card, you name it. We had this beautiful model of taking intellectual property, pairing it with our game capability, and then going out there and entertaining people. But after that, we started taking the game technology and applying it after September 11th to, we thought, you know, more meaningful things like what I called simulation learning. And in the early 2000s, I was helping create a lot of the early standards around serious games. Like, how do you take this powerful medium and have it not just for play, but for like shortening the path to mastery? How do you learn? How do you allow people to learn skills more quickly by putting them in a safe practice environment like a flight simulator? But do it for everything, for running a McDonald's restaurant or long haul trucking or surgery or a variety of things. And that's when I met Mark Prensky, who's I believe on the call. And we started talking about like, how do we put all this technology to a higher moral purpose and do better things with it? And that brings us to where we are today. And I'm kind of fast forwarding. But today we're taking this technology and really thinking through, like, you know, everyone talks about STEM in schools, science and technology and engineering and math, but how do we apply it to some of these other communication skills? Like, how do we make a better society? How do we learn how to deal with each other in more meaningful and thoughtful ways? So that's where we're headed, the sort of windmills that we're tilting at right now. And, you know, it was difficult. We got money out of the North Carolina legislature to fund these exercises we're doing right now. And I'm just going to walk you through some of that. About time that I started sharing my screen, I suppose. Let me do that. All right. Is everyone seeing my screen?
Yep.
All right. So, and again, I don't want to PowerPoint you guys to death, but I have a couple of high level things just to go over. We call this capability the talk engine, and we'll describe a little bit about what that is. But the talk engine is an evolution of some of the work we've been doing with large language models, which goes back 13 years. In one of the previous talks I did, I gave you that whole history of starting to work with machine learning at Microsoft Research Labs in 2009, and sort of evolving over the last, I guess it's 14 years now, working with things like BERT, which was one of the early sort of conversation capabilities, then ChatGPT 1, 2, and then 3. And then, of course, now we have this bump in the night, November 30th, 2022, where everything changed and we're harnessing some of these new capabilities today. But a little bit more background. I mentioned Douglas Adams before, but all the way back in 1997, we were building this game called Starship Titanic with Douglas, and he said, you know, wouldn't it be great if you could talk to the characters? You could actually have a relationship with characters in the game. Oh, look at that. How about that? That's amazing. That's amazing you have that. Thank you, Mac. You know, we called it Velocitext, but it was a really straightforward 1997 based like lookup table, right? Where you could have these somewhat meaningful conversations with characters. You could just chat with them and they would respond back. But occasionally it would seem so lifelike that it would make Douglas said it would make the hair on the back of his neck stand up. That's why he called it spooky talk. But that, if you played that game, that was the first game ever where you could actually just free chat with characters. And there was a lot of weird behavior that you would expect, but in general, it was just a really big lookup table. I'll just leave that there. Now, I skipped over the fact that in 2007, big aerospace company Lockheed Martin bought my company. We brought all of this game technology into Lockheed and said, it's, you guys know a lot about flight simulators for flight, but we believe we can apply it to a whole bunch of other things. So one of the painfully early efforts that I did is I was, looking at what we were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq, listening to these, the urgings of, this isn't just a kinetic battlefield. It's also an environment where we need to think about hearts and minds. And, when you grab kids out of the tobacco farms and the cornfields of Nebraska and North Carolina and drop them into these environments, you can't expect them just to understand right away, how do I walk into a village and interact with people in a way that doesn't offend them, right? That is culturally sensitive and gets more cooperation from people. So we actually built something in a game engine at that time. And I've got it up here, 2009 to 2010 for USAID. So USAID, if you guys know them, they go into these environments and they think, how do we engage with this local township, this village, and get cooperation against the common enemy, the Taliban at that time, maybe. People needed skills like how to work with an interpreter to talk to someone, just little things like take your sunglasses off, take your helmet off when you walk in, don't address females directly, figure out what the hierarchy is, talk to the village elder first, all these little skills. So we built this simulator where literally it was the start of a sim was you're walking into the village, there's some kind of scenario that started and you've got these characters that are walking around. You can walk up to them and engage. And you've got to sort of guess, like, what state are they in? Are they feeling friendly towards us? Are they on guard? Are they actively hostile toward us? And how do you sense that? And how do you look at the patterns and rhythms of that community to understand really what's going on? And part of it was they called it, I think I listed in this, this is right out of a after action review or a case study out of this thing that we built. Where it's called the right seat ride. It's this idea of people that are rotating out of Afghanistan, coming back to the States. They're being replaced by new personnel. And what we found is in order to have better outcomes and fewer deaths among our personnel, it's helpful to have an overlap there where the new people get to right seat ride or ride around and get introduced to everybody first. And introduced to understand, like, you see how there's no cars parked on this street during prayer call? That means there's likely going to be a problem here, like little pattern recognition items like that. Anyway, so this was an early version of it. Another example that I did at Lockheed is, we were doing healthcare simulation and I was leading a big effort there. I think I've talked about that before within this community. But one of the things that stands out for me here is this new hospital being built in Orlando at the time, the nuWorld Pediatric Hospital. But what we built there is simulators. You can see some of the storyboard stuff on the left, and there is a movie here, but it's not really very illustrative of the whole interaction. But the idea is not just the sort of switchology and most of the game-based training I saw in hospitals at the time were how to work with a mannequin, how to set up an infusion pump, the steps of doing all that sort of work. But I'm like, what about that patient sitting there? And there's a mom with a critically ill child. How do you, who's practicing those communication skills? I guess you would call it the bedside manner of how do you talk to both the child and to the parents to make this an easier sort of process, right? And there's nothing easy about it. It's just horrible. It's hard. And so we took that on and I would say it was moderately successful, not really, really successful, but at least we learned a lot about how do you use some of these capabilities to create this thing that we know, which is a safe practice environment. We know that if you take a human and you've got this really complex behavior, whether it's flying an aircraft or working through these USAID efforts or something like this, if you can let them practice a little bit in the environment and fail and learn from it, they get more comfortable with it, with that activity, and you have a shorter path to mastery. The other thing that I was doing at the time at Lockheed is modeling, and this is what we talked about before, Mike, when I was doing the animated personas for market research, is, we were modeling the entire country of Afghanistan. And we wouldn't say that, oh, let's segment the customers in Afghanistan into 4 or 5 categories or 10 categories. We had hundreds of agent-based models, each representing different, the meaningfully different cultures, values, and traditions in that country. So that if you went in and said, like, what if we built a school for girls in Helmand province, who's likely to be okay with it or promote it? Who's going to be neutral, and who's going to be so angry they're going to shoot Malala or try to burn down the school? Those are the kinds of simulations we were building. And at that time, it was actually in a tool called WarSim, which was not designed for this at all. But we, again, repurposed it to try to say, like, let's try to understand what's going on in the hearts and minds before you go build a new road or any of these things you do, which you think you understand the consequences of. But these things all have second, third, and fourth order consequences, which sometimes we don't predict because we don't look past the first order consequence. So that was part of that practice. But then when we started working with a lot of this machine learning stuff, and this is part of what I'd shown to Mike the first time we met, is I can take anybody who I have enough data exhaust on. San Lee was a good example. This was, I think, 2018. Or whenever he died. I can't remember the year he died. But I went to speak at a Comic-Con in Seattle, and I let the audience actually ask him questions. Was it as satisfying as it is today? No. We were using BERT back then, so you would get these 1-sentence answers, like who would win in a battle between Hulk and Thor? And if he'd ever answered that question before, it would go through that sort of corpus of information and then answer the question, but it would always just be a sentence or two. And sometimes you just say, I don't know, I've never answered, there's nothing in my database about that question. And that was the experience of working with chat technologies, even ChatGPT-2, for quite some time, until we had that bump in the night of November 30th, 2022, and everything changed. So I'm just giving you a little bit of history. But even before that, we were starting to think through things like, it's one thing to just chat with a character or put game-based characters in these scenarios that are bounded, that you could really help people practice situations that have some context. But what about all these other soft skills? So this is one program I just want to mention very briefly. This is for the United States Army, and this is for the drill sergeants in basic boot camp. So when we came along, like with this opportunity with University of Arizona and Fort Huachuca, what they're, if you're a drill sergeant at that time, you're looking at skills like and physical fitness and just education of these recruits, and you want to get them graduated with certain skills, a certain level of physical capability, and then move them on. But there was not much thought about, in fact, the commander at the time called it the isms. How do you detect the isms of sexism, racism, extremism? But also, how do you think through what else is going on with it? How do you make a high-performing group of people? And it's not just skills and education and physical fitness. It's also like, what's going on with them emotionally? What's going on with them at home? We gave them leave one weekend. A couple of them came back. One of them got a DWI. The other one's getting a divorce. How do you, as a drill sergeant who's never had to think about that before, think about those elements and components of forming a high performance team of people? And so we have this simulator where you can actually go through those sorts of scenarios and test, like, how do I intervene in this case? And with this person, how do I talk to them? What are the incentives and communication that's going to get me a better outcome than if I just say, do more push-ups, right? And I'll just leave that there. But this was really interesting for us, and trying to apply this to a bunch of other areas, like even in if you want a high-performing team in IBM, Kevin, or at Gartner, or at a bank or whatever, like this idea of thinking through all the components of them, not just what skills do they have, but thinking about the culture that you're trying to build within a company and how do you model and simulate that. So we're putting a lot of thought into that. And then finally, and we're getting close to where we're going to talk today, how do we think about managing the classroom? And the classroom, again, is not just about here's a raw recruit. What kind of skills and information transfer processes do I need to put in place to get these kids to learn? Kids show up with all kinds of different states every day. And some of it is based on, did they get enough sleep? What's going on at home? And nutrition is a big deal. And I'll just mention briefly that I worked on a DARPA study for a year called cognitive coupling. So it's kind of like Elon Musk's Neuralink thing, where we're really thinking with a special operations group, how do you form a high performing team of people? And if you're the commander, how do you sense the readiness level of your team? And we actually had transdermal patches on all the team members' heads. We're trying to sense like anxiety and comfort. Are they in a learning state? And later on, by the way, and I won't go there too far, is we actually learned that a lot of this is chemical. So how do you affect state? Well, it's oxytocin, it's adrenaline, it's serotonin, it's all these. If you want a team to learn well, you just dope them with oxytocin and then put them together, and they learn faster, they become a team better. We can't do that in schools, but it did. That my takeaway from that was nutrition is a really big part of it, right? Showing up chemically ready to learn along with all the other components. All right. Lots going on here. The last thing I'll talk about, and I'm going to skip past some of this, but just know our IRS has got an RFI out where they're looking at how do we model all the people in the United States and try to affect or understand state and that sort of thing. I'm gonna skip past that. There is, when we talk about game-based AI simulations of people to teach soft skills like understanding body language and tone of voice and facial expression in an encounter with a person, which is what you're about to see, there's this infatuation or this great interest in high fidelity. And can we do more and more high fidelity characters today? Yes, we can. This is an example from even 8 years ago.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and this is Contour Reality Capture.
So in real time, I can just have a video camera on a person. I can capture it into a mesh. I can texture map it. I can usually map it up pretty well with synchronizing the mouth to the voice, although latency usually makes that a problem. So we can do this, and we can create really high fidelity, very convincing characters today that they're expensive to make, they're expensive to administer in real time. You really need a high-end machine to do it. And I'm telling you all this because when we first did our studies around this in our presentation to like, how do we teach soft skills in schools? And how do we teach people to like go in and interact with a group of people that are synthetic and understand and read body language and facial expression? And am I making that person nervous? Are they comfortable with what I'm saying to them? We thought, let's make it really, really high fidelity, right? And we found out that trying to get across what's called the uncanny valley is still very difficult. As realistic as I can make these characters today, and I can make, hair realistically today, I can make sweat bead on the upper lip, all of that, but we still keep running in, especially in real time. If it's recorded, that's one thing, right? We can do that. Doing it in real time where I'm pulling some text, I'm mapping that text to the mouth and the expressions and everything in real time on a 3D character, that is still I would call it a DARPA hard problem for those of you in that world like Linton and others. So we're not doing that. This is my little sort of joke piece I usually show. Like this was actually in real time, but it was on a PS4. Right, so that it's hard to tell that's not a real person. But it's on a PS4. So I could do this in schools if I knew every student had that level of compute power but I still have the latency issue of the speed of light if I'm going over a network and trying to do it. So again, there's some problems there. So who you're going to meet today is this character. This would be Sophie. And she's, not as photorealistic, but we do have complete puppeting capability over her body, her facial expressions and all that. So we after doing a bunch of tests, we decided that this is sufficient to be able to teach kids, like, well, when you went down that line of questioning, you saw some of the people in the group, some of these characters are disengaging from you. Others are kind of neutral, but some are disengaging. So try a different tack and you'll notice that just from their body language, their posture, their engagement level, their face, that they're engaging more. We don't need photorealism. We don't need the high level of realism, which is a lot of compute power and art to achieve that in order to convey the same level, to accomplish the learning objective. Let's put it that way. The other piece before I move over to Linda, and you can get her perspective on this, is, there's some attempts in schools just to connect straight up to GPT-4 or to a lot of these other large language models. We found that is not a very good idea. And some of you who've been playing with this understand why. These systems still hallucinate, they make up information. They can have surprising behaviors sometimes not safe for work kinds of behaviors or statements. We don't allow that in a classroom for a 9th grader, right? So we built this walled garden instead, where there's a layer of like, okay, let's create this character, let's give them a whole backstory of life, right? And then you can ask questions about that life and they'll answer it, but they're going to pull from a sort of distilled set of responses that we've pre-vetted. So you can, it'll run through the GPT-4 filter. It'll come inside of this walled garden that we have, where we've checked all the responses for something that would work and make sense in a school that isn't going to be crazy, that isn't going to have parents calling in saying, what happened here? Why is this? Why did you have my child talking to a character who's talking about Nazis? Like, why is that happening, right? So we prevent that by having that distilled down into a question and answer bank that's still interpreted and still satisfying, but again, achieves the learning objective. And with that, I'm going to relinquish it to Linda to allow her to give you her perspective on where we're headed with this. And again, this is funded by the North Carolina legislature. It's part of a project called Spark NC and 16 I believe it's 16 or is it 18 now, Linda? Innovation districts in North Carolina. But the idea is, the reason we were able to get bipartisan support for this is it's all about like the next generation workforce, right? They need these skills. Companies like IBM and Cisco and anybody has said, like, look, it's great that you have all these STEM skills now and kids are showing up knowing how to program and they know math. They're still not really great at writing, apparently. But this interpersonal communication skills seem to be missing somewhat. So this is an attempt to actually teach those skills. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Linda Bernard.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure there's anything left for me to say now, but yeah, so from a teacher perspective, the reason this is needed and is important is because, as Kevin was correctly saying, we have a whole generation of children right now that are being raised looking at cell phones and computer screens more than other human beings in real life. And so there's a whole set of skills that are lacking. In some ways, in other ways, there are new skills that they're learning that will serve them well. However, we do need to find a way to teach our students those soft skills, the teamwork, how to talk to people, how to ask them questions, how to really get to the bottom of an issue, how to interview someone, how to be in an interview. These kinds of things are really important. And that is the scope of this project that we have in front of you, called Team Lab. It is in association with a company called District C. And what they do is they have groups of students that go into companies and solve real life problems, which as a teacher, that filled me with joy because, you know, that's always the thing we're looking for. That's always what we want to do. We want to make the learning relevant and useful for our students. So this was wonderful. The idea is that you have a group of students who will go into a company with a mentor, and they'll be given a real life problem that that company is facing at the moment. And then they are asked to solve it and bring their own perspectives to it. And in the process of that, they're interviewing people at the company to get more information. They're interviewing customers sometimes. And then they're working together as a team, sometimes 6 or 7 of them, to come up with a solution, which they then also present. So as you can see, there's a wide range of very useful skills being taught there. What we were asked to do is provide an online platform to support that program, to allow students to practice those skills, to really kind of hone them, fine tune those skills so that when they go into those companies, they're really ready to do their best work. So in front of you, you see Sophia, who is a young lady, and she has an interest in volleyball, and she has a whole persona background that we've designed for her. Very detailed, and as Richard was saying, it is I like to think of it as not a walled garden, as more as a swimming pool. All of the information is inside that pool, and there's a lot to draw from. So you can see here, we're still making this. Yes, I can show you a few things. So we've got a couple of different characters. This is Sophia. We also have Ria.
I like to play volleyball.
There's Ria. And we have Caleb. There we are. There's Caleb. And we've spent some time making sure that the conversations that they have are relevant. I can show you that when you type in, so the idea is that students will type in questions and ask these NPCs as though they're in an interview with them to practice their skills. So we know that Sophia likes to play volleyball, so let's ask her why, or what she likes about volleyball. What do you like about playing volleyball? And
the thrill of competition and the desire to improve myself and my skills motivate me to keep playing volleyball.
Now, as you can see, her lips are not synced currently with this, but that's because this is still in development phase of this one. But I can show you a couple of the emotions that we've got going on, which is kind of fun. This particular character was designed by an Italian group, so we have this wonderful Italian. So there's the happiness. And we have some sadness, nervousness, one of my personal favorites, confusion, and interest. I'm not going to go through all of them, but yeah. So you can see that we have got quite a wide range of emotional things that have been shown here, and they will work in nicely with the conversation as we're doing it. Yeah, the idea was to make them believable, but not, as Richard was saying, not photorealistic, because that uncanny valley problem. So we do feel like we've meshed those two together and created lovable characters that our students are going to enjoy interacting with.
Can you mention the coach? Because in District C, when they do the in-person sessions, there's always a coach to try to intervene when they're doing their little scenarios in person to say, like, consider trying it this way or that way. right?
Yeah, so there, yes, as you can see above at the top here, there is a coach available. So when the student asks a question that perhaps wasn't in line with what they needed to be asking, the coach will jump in and suggest that they ask a question that's got a particular keyword at the beginning of it, to help them, to guide them in their interview techniques and questioning techniques. The coach will also jump in if there is an inappropriate question or anything like that. Of course, none of our students would ever do that, but should they ever drift that way, a coach will jump in and say, oh, you know, Sophia doesn't know how to answer that question. Perhaps you could ask a question like this, and give them an example. So the coach will also guide the student at the very beginning of the whole process through how to use the software. And you can see there also we have a timer. So there is a 5-minute timed conversation that happens with Sophia and with Ria and with Caleb. And so students feel like within that 5 minutes, they have to really get to the meat of it. There is a gaming platform associated with this that, you know, that you can, it's not that you unlock levels of questioning, but the deeper the student goes into the questioning of the character, the more kind of points they get for good questioning. Yeah, and then at the end, the coach will respond and, you know, say, well done, you did a good job of this, or I really love this question you asked, and this is why.
Is Jim O'Shea on?
I don't think so.
I
Yeah,
don't believe so.
he was talking about it being a great technique to teach journalism.
Yeah, Jim is a colleague of ours who was the managing editor of the Chicago Tribune and of the Los Angeles Times at one point. But when we showed him this, he had this interesting idea. It's like, what if you had, you could have a simulated, you know, event that happens in a community. It could be a car crash, could be a murder, it could be whatever. And then you as the reporter show up and you're trying to talk to all the people who witnessed this event. And you have to come up with your questioning skills, like how do you get them to tell a complete and accurate story? But then after you watch their body language and their facial expressions as they tell you the story, and you try to determine how true it was, you know, how much truth was in what I just heard, how complete was what I just heard. Now, one of the ideas that we have that we're building on from that also is this idea. I think, Mark, you might like this, is the idea of imagine going back in history. We're already doing this with Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, Matthew Henson, a few other things with our partnership within the footsteps of history. But the idea of, you know, you're going to relive the voyage, the travels of Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta. But then you also get to talk to people along the way and even talk to these people from history. And the better your questioning gets, you'd see this little histogram-like thing filling out over time to see like how complete of this story can I get out of, you know, one classroom period or one session with them. And that's how scoring might happen. You know, it goes back to like the USAID thing I showed you, the sort of winning of that game was you get everyone in that community so comfortable with you that they'll share with you a night letter from the Taliban. And that just shows that their trust in you has gotten to a level where they're now telling you like, this is what's happening. You didn't know this, but the Taliban come in at night and they do this. And I'm trusting you with my life that I'm giving you this information. But imagine being able to do that with events in history or learning journalism skills, or even trying to understand, you know, one of the one of the issues we all have as leaders with teams of people that we're trying to manage towards a common goal is how do I learn to judge what everybody's telling me, right? And how is everybody really oriented in the right direction or not? So I think there's lots of opportunity here, but I'd love to hear what you guys think so far.
I'll jump in with a question unless Linda, was there more you wanted to go through on the deck?
No. Well, I mean, I could speak for hours about this, but I think I'd best stop.
Well, I mean, one thing that jumped out to me, folks, raise your hand. I, as a co-host, have the power to just interrupt people at will. Feel free to raise your hand or put questions in the Q&A. I was curious, Linda and Richard, do you intend for the threaded chat that appears on there, will that remain? So is that a permanent part of the interface, as opposed to, as the technology and the agents improve, right, it becomes more like a conversation? Or do we need to have that? Will that, because I was thinking the threaded chat after a while might, or maybe this isn't bad, reinforce the disconnect by having somebody, staring at the screen. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously today speech to text is a possibility, and we do have the luxury in these innovation centers that where this is going to be initially, where we control the hardware and the software and everything, so we can have microphones that pick up. The problem with speech to text is, especially when you have North Carolina accents and all that, in the test that we did, it could get a little frustrating still, even where we are today.
Let me speak. Can
You
I say
also-
something to that?
Yes, Mark.
I was very surprised recently. My son bought a car, and he's corresponding with, he's talking to a friend of his who also has that same car across the country, and he said, I said, did you talk to Russell? He said, yeah, I talked to Russell. He said, I have to talk to Russell about this. I have to talk. And they have talked for hours, not a single time in voice. It's all text. When he says talk to somebody, he means text them.
Yes, yes. So one of the things that we're doing to overcome this very issue that you just highlighted, Mike, was inside of our platform, as you saw, the character takes up 2/3 of the space. So a part of the gaming mechanism going on there as well is we building in something where students can click on the character when they recognize a particular emotion happening and choose that emotion, so that it then tags it to the question or the answer that was given. So in addition to just the question and answering, there's some NLP going on where they're starting to really understand, oh, that question I asked did spark an emotion from the character here, and this is what it is. Also, we did need to have a text transcript at the end for teaching purposes and grading purposes. So that was useful for us. So when a student finishes their interactions, they can download the transcript, and it actually has encoded in it those prompts, as well as any kind of emotional tags that they associated with a particular statement. So they're able to analyze it afterwards. And really, there are some other assignments that teachers are giving them based on that as well, which I think it really builds in the meat of the lesson itself.
Actually, so anyway, speech to text, we can implement that as long as it doesn't distract from the learning objective. And but and if you've ever looked at your own transcript from a Zoom call, what it taught me is how many times I say and filler words. You get all that stuff filled in there. So I find that useful for reinforcement.
Oh, absolutely. I noticed one of our participants, I think he's a relatively new guy, was asking if he would imagine that eye tracking systems in the future might be implemented to understand kind of engagement better than have the system adapt accordingly.
Yeah, we have talked about that at length, and those libraries of capability. What's great today is you just go grab that library and implement it, and then see how does it fit into everything else. That's really what this is a really big integration effort. So eye tracking does work if you've got a good camera. As you might know, depending on where your camera is on your device, that affects it. But putting it in the sense, so when we built something at Lockheed called the holodeck or holowall, and we ended up embedding the camera in the middle of the wall so that it's eye level, instead of, otherwise you started out, it's up here, and then you get people staring up at this. Not look, you want them to look at the screen, but have it not be obtrusive. That's an engineering issue also.
Any other questions at this point? I have some more. Mark.
Okay, if you unleash me, we have to have a large conversation. I'm blown away by this. I think this is fabulous. Thank you guys. You've done an incredible amount of work. The first thing that occurs to me, and if I can I share my screen?
Sure.
Let's see, screen.
Yeah, you can share your screen, Mark.
Yes, I see this, and I'm looking for the screen I want to
Down at the
share.
bottom, the green.
No, I have the thing. I just got to pick a screen out of a billion.
It's the lineup, the mug.
Oh, this is the one. Okay, so this is the screen I want to share, and I don't know if I can make it full. The problem is I want to make it full screen. But anyway, the point is that you said something that was interesting to me about mastering these soft skills, right? And I don't call them soft skills. I call them diamond skills because they're harder than hard. But what they really are transferable lifetime capabilities that are different from task-specific skills, perhaps. And so that's the distinction that I've been using. But here's the issue, that these are lifetime capabilities. You can't master them. You don't master any of this stuff. You just get better at it. It's like being a musician. The top musicians in the world don't think of themselves as masters. They think of themselves as keeping, well, how can I get better? How can I get better? So somehow it would be good to think of these things as a scale. And every one of these things is on a scale. It's very hard to define that scale, but that would be incredibly useful if we could define that scale for any one of these. And this is my list. So that you don't say, do you have it? It's not a yes or no, I'm a master, I'm not a master. And this is where I disagree with Sal Khan and other people. It's really, how good am I on this skill? How good do I need to be to accomplish the kinds of things that I'm going on? What skills can I put together? In other words, nobody's a master of everything, or nobody's even that good at everything. Everybody has a profile, and the team is the best combination of profiles that reinforce each other. And so that's it's just a different view of, well, they're soft skills, and do you have them or don't you have them, and can you build them? No, it's much more complex than that, I think, and nuanced in a positive way.
Oh yeah, I'd love to have this slide actually, because I think you're spot on, and that would be really helpful in our conversations with folks.
It's
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah, I agree that these are increasingly more valued capabilities that we seem to have some deficit in right now, as we've said.
right. Well, it's because partially we've called them soft. We've said they're not as important as the task-specific skills. So that's one comment. If you well, we're so few. If you will indulge me for a half a second here. The second comment thing that I've heard recently was very interesting from a guy in, I think he's in Ireland, who was even an ex-IBM guy. He talks about triads, and he said he was thinking about how you make good decisions, and he was saying the best decisions that you can make is when you have two people of perhaps opposing views, and then a third more neutral party, which sometimes can even be a bot. And then the decision you want to make is the combined decision of those three, as opposed to any individual. So like you do a vote of the triads rather than a vote of the individuals. And that's what
worth 80 IQ points thing that Alan Kay talks about, right?
I'm not sure about that. I can point to this guy's a weird, brilliant guy who's a devout Roman Catholic, who's somewhere in the middle of I don't know. He was very interesting.
I'd like to know him because I collect weird, brilliant people.
Well, he's definitely a good piece of your collection. So let's start with those two, because that's there's a third one, but it's gone right now. So let's keep going.
That's great.
That's great, Rebecca.
Hi. You've talked about this a little bit, but one of the important things in your work with District C and in the footsteps is making this available to students in communities of all levels of affluence and access. And so there were some very considered decisions. It would be great to hear a little bit about what you're doing in that front.
Yeah, I'm really excited that you're asking this question. Yes, so obviously leveling the playing field and for education and helping all students wherever they are in the United States, whichever area they find themselves in, whichever stage in life they find themselves in, able to access important learning in a way that makes sense to them, that's meaningful, that's transferable, and really supports the mission of making sure that all students are prepared to do what they need to do in the workforce when they get there. And you've all heard that expression that we don't even know what students are going to be asked to do when they get there. How can we possibly prepare them? And I mean, I've found that the real answer to that is just make sure that they can do whatever they need to do. And that generally means that they've got to have all those skills that we've been talking about. And actually Spark NC calls them durable skills, not soft skills or diamond skills. I like that. But they call them durable skills. Yes, and leveling that playing field through giving access to students online to basically, I mean, it's not a virtual tutor, it's not an AI tutor really, because it's much more than that. It's a learning mentor and somebody who's going to be able to support them as they progress through their educational journey. And we have so many opportunities to help provide students with greater learning. They're also faced with such a huge funnel of information coming at them from the internet. And another important thing we have to teach them is how to filter that. And so providing things like this, like Sophia, gives us that swimming pool of questions and knowledge that they can use to learn these important skills.
And I'll just add on, Linda, that the other core thesis that we have, especially with regard to education, and Linda, I think this is important as we look at areas like Puerto Rico and places like that, we want to make sure that everybody can take advantage of the known values of simulation learning, whatever we're trying, whether it's in STEM or in this history stuff we're doing, or these durable diamond skills we're trying to convey. But the idea is they should only need a compute device of some kind in a web browser. They don't need high-end machines. They don't need a lot of bandwidth. We can do it in really processor and bandwidth constrained environments. And that's part of our solution. There's nothing to install. There's nothing to administrate. So we're trying to get all the friction out of, over the last 20 years I've been doing this, I've observed those obstacles which prevent adoption of all this game-based stuff. There's a lot of really good game-based capability out there. It's not making it into all public schools because of those environments. So everything we're building, we're trying to make sure we can get into all the schools.
Yeah.
It does, because of the medium that it's in, it does require a compute device, but it should work on a Chromebook, even if there isn't a lot of bandwidth.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Did I see somebody raising a hand? No?
I did again. I'll come back if you want me.
I have to look for any others, Mark. One second.
Mac had his hands up too.
Yeah, and I'll try to do this quick, and I don't know if I can. Richard, some of the things, and I hang around with a lot of educators, as many of us do, and some of the things I'm running into is kind of cultural incongruence between the teacher and the student. And some of that is a result of, say, the child grew up in an extraordinarily patriarchal society and then immigrated into a not as much patriarchal society, but is attempting to maintain his own cultural standard. which creates dissonance between the child and the teacher.
Hmm.
How would these tools help adjust for cultural dissonance and perhaps establish some type of trajectory for, I don't know how to say this correctly, but cultural alignment?
Yeah, I think, like I said, with the USAID trainer that we did, there's this big idea within the military that I was a big part of, which is they call it stress inoculation, but it's also just inoculation against you're gonna be dropped in, and that's how I described it. Is you're pulling these kids out of North Carolina tobacco fields with a high school education, then you drop them into this environment, and you expect them to operate in a culturally sensitive manner that doesn't exacerbate the situation, and like with no training, and that's ridiculous. So I think this idea of cultural inoculation, if you want to call it that, maybe that's not a good term, but I find simulation really good for that. With the Marines out in Camp Pendleton near San Diego, we have this environment called the Tomato Factory. And in there, before we send Marines overseas, we actually slowly turn up the dial and start exposing them to like battlefield conditions. But it's not just the visuals of and the kinetic skills of a battlefield, but the smells and the sights. But the smells apparent also, right? Like that's something that you don't get a lot of training on until you actually get over there. And it really is overwhelming in many cases. Burning flesh, rotting flesh is not something that most people are accustomed to, and it really can be overwhelming. But in this case, like slowly tuning that, nudging people along a continuum of getting more comfortable with that new environment or that new group of people, is I think we can use a lot of what we've described here to design for that. I think there's a good opportunity there.
Also,
for example, the person going through this process may be the teacher, not just the student.
Got to meet them more than halfway. I agree with that completely.
so one of the other things that we are looking at doing, and in this case, you just saw 3 characters available, but obviously we will be expanding the number of characters, and students being able to choose which character they want to interact with. And having a variety of cultural backgrounds within our pool of characters might also answer that question a little bit more.
Thank you.
And I think and groups of people, right? Like you say something and you'll see, and we've learned that in gaming, like your faction reputation. And in fact, I'll go back to the Afghanistan example. You might perform an action and you'd think like, well, was that good? It's like, well, it depends on the group who's perceiving it. Your commander thinks one thing about what you just did. The broader world community thinks another. This group that's here local is positive. Here's a neutral group, and here's people who are angry. But it's all the same action, but everybody's perceiving it from a different perspective, and understanding and visualizing that before you do it. I think about the example of the colonel who was in front of a lot of people in this Islamic community, and he kissed the Quran, thinking that like, oh, it's just as good as my Bible, and he kissed it. And he did not understand, because he wasn't culturally aware of what was going on. He just made lifelong enemies of a large group of people who are going to kill him now because of a simple action, which he didn't even perceive, right? And it's true at a minor level, just around travel, where like in Thailand, you don't show the bottom of your foot to a person. Like there's all these little things like that, little nuances.
Yeah, and those are great opportunities for teaching as well. Getting a platform that taught all of those skills to students would be extremely helpful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? We're a little bit over, and we don't want to abuse people's schedules, but any other final questions?
Well, I've got a ton of stuff, and we should book a time, Richard, Linda, and I, to talk. But one of them has to do, one big one has to do with accomplishment, and this is I'm thinking about you can get all these skills. And even if you increase all these skills, you show up in a workplace and you've never done anything, you don't know how to get anything done, nobody really cares. You're still going to start at the bottom. How could we make this, how could you potentially make this more like an Ender's Game, more like an escape room? So that there's really a task you have to do, not things you have to get better at, not all this stuff. You have to get something done, right? In Ender's Game, they had to beat the guys. In the escape room, you have to get out of the damn room. In software, it has to work, you know, and build that in rather than what I hear people doing, which is getting to a presentation. We found a solution, we got to a presentation. I think that's old in the past and not helpful.
No, I agree, and that's part of the District C current model. It is an apprenticeship sort of thing. You go and join a company for some period of time, and we saw the outbriefs from that, where they actually have to try to solve some business problems. So I think, thank you, Linton, for your time today. Look, appreciate your joining us today.
I want to learn a whole lot more about District C from you guys.
Enjoy them, yeah. We have a South by Southwest EDU session we've proposed. So please vote for that and come see it. Right, Rebecca?
Absolutely. Kevin,
You
we'll
want to
share
go to
the
you want to go to
information
the south of Texas and this with this heat, right?
Until March. Not till March. Not right now.
Yeah.
Time of the year in Austin is March.
If you don't see it on social
Can I
media.
let me just add two more things quickly. Somebody was once making something called Dinner Party with History, where you could choose historical characters from any time. You know, let's get Julius Caesar and Shakespeare and this, and let's have dinner with them. Let's talk with them. It doesn't have to be dinner. And that would be a wonderful concept, especially you know, for things. The other one is talking to the cultural thing that Mac brought up is pick your hero. You know, for example, who do you know, you may want to have a conversation with Moses, and you may want to have a conversation with Muhammad, and you may want to have a conversation with Confucius. You know, you can pick your hero in all of these kind of things, and therefore it becomes relevant to you.
Yeah, we had talked about, we were even talking about this before with our lesser GPT capabilities, but we thought about this idea of having build your own advisory board, right? And if you want to have Leonardo da Vinci and Martin Luther King and John von Neumann and Mark Prensky available to you,
I sign up. I want to do it. I need an advisory board.
But we already did that on Content Evolution. We have, you know, animated personas up for Buckminster Fuller and those folks, right? Because they advised me at a young age, and they continue to influence my thinking. So yeah, it's a great idea. It needs to spread.
Bruce has his hand up.
Yes, yeah. Bruce, let's get to Bruce. He's been very patient. Bruce, fire away.
Oh, thanks, Mike. No, I just wanted to tell you all how much I appreciate sitting in on this. You know, it's just some brilliant work. It's just great stuff, and I think it's going to make in the long run, it's going to have a profound effect, not just on our own country, but the world, because it's a breakthrough, and we're trying to figure it out, and ultimately we'll get there, but it's going to be a long road. But thanks for starting on the journey.
Thank you all. And if you have if any of you have little quotes like that, we can certainly use these as, and criticism, of course, that's part of this process. As we roll this forward, we're going to be talking about it a lot more in South by Southwest, other conferences. I just learned I'm going to be on the stage with Sam Altman here shortly in San Francisco I'll be talking about this. I don't know what he's going to talk about, but.
I was just going to say that Bruce is also getting me some Malawi tea. So he's a god, by the way.
Ooh. Where are you, Bruce?
Sacramento.
Okay.
He has Malawi tea, so oh my goodness.
Sacramento, crossroads of the coffee and tea industries.
I can tell you with Linda, every day it's around 4:30, everything stops.
Yes, it's tea time. That's the way it is.
Briefly.
Well, you'll now have some Malawi tea.
Yay! That's so wonderful. That's so wonderful.
Kevin, I think it's been a great session. Do we have any final closing remarks from you?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to Richard and Linda for sharing Ultisim's tech. Talk Engine is it's the right innovation at the right time for young people who are, you know, they have a disadvantage that they don't even actually know that they have, right? But the minute they enter the workforce or start to get interviewed for a position, they'll realize, right, that the gatekeepers are, you know, who are normally in human resources are very skilled at this, right? And you know, all of a sudden you get deselected, right, for a number of reasons. So keep going. It's fantastic. Mike, close us out.
Thank you, everybody, again. Linda and Richard, thank you so much. And everybody who joined the call. This is a great discussion. It is recorded as usual. And our technology lead, Kevin Clark, will be posting it as soon as possible. Thank you again. And we have another session when, Kevin?
Week from today.
Week from today.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an open mic. We've had a series of really thoughtful calls. So as we move toward the end of August, we invite you to bring your topics to Content Evolution nuWorld. Mike, thanks for hosting today. Richard,
Pleasure.
Linda, thank you. And all you do, be intentional. Cheers.
See you, everybody.
Bye.